Fáilteoisteach go dtíon cruinniú seo den údrás póilínteachta an cruinniú deireanach in na bliana seo óscóir an phobal ach ag tríd mé drón an odag ag tríd mé dró in na bliana agus ag teacht cúibh mar seo gan deiscuing teacht le chéile I láthair chéile. You're welcome to this November meeting of the Policing Authority with the Commissioner and his colleagues being held in public, the final meeting in public this year, and still unfortunately unable to meet in person for all the obvious reasons. Welcome to the Commissioner and to his colleagues to this meeting. We have a crowded agenda, so apart from noting again, as we habitually do at these meetings, the performance of the Garda Síochána during the COVID-19 health emergency, the significant achievement in terms of the public, as we have been reporting in our 9 thus far reports to the Minister for Justice, and noting also the fact that side by side with that, the regular work of policing goes on, and the success in interrupting and disrupting criminal activity and protecting people from those who would wish to prey on the vulnerable has been an important part of the work of Garda members and Garda staff throughout the country. And that is much appreciated by all. This is a crowded agenda, and I think we will move straight to that. The first item on our agenda is the issue of DNA samples. This is a question that has been discussed at a number of public meetings and at several private meetings. And we've come, I won't say to the end, but close to the end of that, and are looking forward now to the steps that are being taken to ensure that the problems that arose have been resolved and will not recur. And I'm asking Dr. Moling Ryan to lead the questions on this topic.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you said in your introduction, the areas of management of DNA samples and the various issues that have arisen, it's been an issue for the authority since as far back as April of last year, and we've raised it at successive authority meetings. There are obviously some significant issues, but perhaps I might set very, very briefly a context so that we don't get lost in the details of the investigation that has taken place and the report which we appreciate having received from Garda Síochána. But just to set some element of context, firstly, the authority appreciates the importance of DNA samples and the extent to which they are, to an increasingly significant extent, involved in crime investigation. So we very much appreciate its importance. And that's why this is an issue of some significance and the importance of being addressed here today. Just to take you through very quickly, the Garda's Professional Standards Unit in 2018 commenced an examination of certain aspects of the Act, and notably the adequacy in terms of issues associated with the provenance, the recording and so on of DNA samples. And one of the issues, there had been a media report suggesting the loss of 2,000 samples, and obviously this gave rise to some concern in relation to the potential impact on crime investigation, on court cases and so on. So Commissioner, you then appointed Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll to address this particular issue, and over the following 18 months or so, there was a detailed investigation which gave rise to a very, very extensive and detailed report, which was presented to us in the authority just at the end of September. So the particular issue that's reflected in that report suggests that the starting point was a figure of 4,446 sample reference numbers, and we're really talking about the engagement between the samples having been taken and recorded appropriately and brought to Forensic Science Ireland, and obviously they're analysed. So the initial figure that Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll was dealing with was 4,446, which was significant. by any stretch of the imagination. So the suggestion was that there wasn't the concern was the possibility of no associated sample having been notified by Forensic Science Ireland. So the work that that Assistant Commissioner O'Driscoll has done and reflected in the report is that he has reduced this figure, and I won't go into the detail of how this has happened, although it may be possible to maybe be part of the conversation here. We reduced that to 489 and subsequently reduced to 469 outstanding, and I know that the investigation is still continuing. So that's the very barest of context. So we're suggesting that there were concerns in relation to a significant number right at the outset. That in the intervening period, Assistant Commissioner Driscoll has managed to associate or to explain quite a considerable number of those, but there are still more than 450 samples outstanding, and so I want to engage for just a few minutes in relation to certain issues out of that. And the first issue, if I might put to you, Commissioner, is that the figure that was identified at the outset, and indeed the extensive process that had to go in to try to identify what had happened, and the fact that there's still numbers outstanding, would suggest that there has been a significant lapse in governance, a significant lapse in accountability in relation to this area of considerable importance.
Well, good afternoon, and I'll also ask John O'Driscoll to comment. But what I would point out to, and hopefully by way of reassurance, so if you look at the period that we're examining between November 15 and April 19, there's just over 46,000 sample reference numbers created, and of that then, as you say yourself, almost 4,500 were those SRNs were not matched to a DNA sample, and that was then the matter of subsequent investigation. But as we are at this moment in time, that number has been reduced through examination and pursuit of these matters down to 489, and that's just over 1%. But even of that number, 255 individuals were sampled on another occasion. So we're getting down to quite a small, well, 0.5% in terms of a loss of the DNA sample. In that we can't either account for it or it was never reported through the FSI. So at least our systems have held up whenever we've provided this in-depth examination. I think the difficulty for us is that we received this legislation. It created a national DNA database, but the IT system that would support that, and it's really the IT system which is important in this, is the investigation management system, and that's just presently been rolled out. So hitherto, we had a paper-based system, and that's always inherently risky when you're dealing with such matters. And I would suggest that we've narrowed the area for concern as far as and reported on that to a great extent. There's still more work to be done, but we're in a significantly better position than was initially reported of 4,446. But this, and part of the solution in respect of this, is the investigation management system, which then would provide a robust accountability regime in terms of the IT structure to deal with this. So no, it shouldn't have happened. In some ways, I have to say, when we're based on a paper-based bureaucracy, there was always that risk, together with all the other systems then that we were engaged in, which were paper-based as well. The investigation management system, which we're rolling out, we should resolve a lot of these matters. And the way forward then is through a more automated process. And in fact, then the computer programming in effect makes you take the right actions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate the explanation, and I know that you didn't want in any way even to infer that 0.5% loss is an acceptable one, because there are consequences associated with. But you've explained it, and particularly in terms of the investigative management system and the potential that arises. But can I the issue that I had raised in my question was the issue of governance and accountability and deficit that would appear to have existed over a period of time to have allowed that position to develop. And I fully accept your point in relation to it not being appropriate to happen. Can I address, though? I think there are maybe a couple of issues. I don't want to get too much into the detail, Commissioner, but there are a number of issues in terms of potential assurance to people at large, and that is the cases that are outstanding that you've been addressing and investigating further. Have you examined the impact that those might have in relation the pursuing of court action, court cases? Is there a potential that any court cases might suffer as a consequence of the issue that's been faced in relation to samples that we haven't been able to account for?
So, in effect, and you're talking about a number of, I believe, and if I'm wrong on this, John, you please come in, 234 individuals that we don't hold samples on. So, if they have not become a suspect in an investigation in some other manner through other evidence or through intelligence or whatever inquiries may lead to, then there is a risk that those 234 may have engaged a crime for which we've an unidentified DNA sample within the forensic science laboratories. So that is a risk. I think it's a small risk, given that the DNA is never just the sole method, or very rarely, should I say, is the sole method of detection. And there's all the other means of detection of offences are open to us. So I think whilst the risk does exist, it's very hard to quantify, but I do think it, in terms of just a database of over 46,000 samples in this period, it is a small risk.
If I can add to that, Moling, to say that we continue to examine each and every one of the cases involved. So when you talk about 240 cases, 234 cases in particular, where we had an issue, 73 of those are cases where a person can be sampled again, and in relation to 161, it wasn't possible to resample. However, we have analysed that further and found that 92 of the samples taken were for intelligence purposes only. In 35 of the cases, a person was actually prosecuted. And there are then 34 cases where a person has not been prosecuted. And we're going into each one of those cases to see what the significance of the DNA sample was in the individual case. And when the exercise is over or completed, we will have that sort of analysis in respect of every single one of the samples involved.
Yeah, you've done a huge amount of work here, Assistant Commissioner Driscoll, in terms of delving down from that 4,446 cases and working down where there you were able to identify samples that were matched to the numbers and samples that were never taken, and so on. And your report, as I mentioned, is extremely detailed. But there are concerns, certainly from the authorities' perspective. I raised the issue of governance and accountability, but there is the possibility, and a strong possibility here, suggested from what gave rise to your report in the first instance and to your investigation, that there has been an inadequate appreciation within the organisation as to the importance of DNA samples, perhaps not universal, but certainly in some significant areas, and whether there is a suggestion of maybe a lack of due care and attention to those samples, the nature of it. And I know one of my colleagues has previously mentioned the importance in terms of human rights, as well as what we've discussed with the Commissioner in terms of the judicial process and policing outcomes. So was this something that you had felt or identified in the course of your examination?
Well, while This report has been forwarded to the Policing Authority. It has also been forwarded to GSOC, who launched an inquiry based on the reporting which suggested that 2,000 samples were missing. And also we have, myself and the Commissioner have reported to the DNA Oversight Committee, which is established by statute in the 2014 DNA Act. But when the Act was enacted, it was envisaged that a lot of things would take place to ensure that DNA could be properly handled. It envisaged the creation of FSI as it is structured today.
That's right.
It envisaged the loss of certain functions from the Garda National Technical Bureau that would transfer to FSI. None of that had taken place. It envisaged the setting up the DNA database itself. FSI has restructured, but they haven't got a suitable premises. However, that is under construction, and it is ahead of schedule, I believe, to be commissioned in 2022.
Can I ask you, though, Assistant Commissioner, if I might? I mean, my issue was really around that area of the detailed investigation and that you undertook, and whether or not you had felt that there wasn't a significant focus on the appropriate care of DNA samples and their appropriate transmission and recording and so on. Was this something that you had identified? Not, and I'm wondering, is it was it more widespread than just a modest number of cases?
Well, again, it's a reflection on the complexities of investigations and all the bits and pieces in an investigation, and then trying to establish has everything been done within an investigation. And that is precisely what the investigation management system addresses. And it provides a situation where we can monitor each and every action that's created, which will include the taking of a DNA sample. And an immediate.
I'm sorry to come back to it again, because there is an issue of culture, and I appreciate the considerable benefit associated with a technical response. But there is a culture issue, and it very often doesn't matter what we do in terms of technical solutions, that it doesn't necessarily address the issues, the cultural issues, the personal issues, the organizational issues. Did you find, admittedly in the context of a paper-based system, did you find issues or concerns in certain areas in relation to the care that was being applied to handling and managing DNA samples?
Insofar as people did not appreciate, in some instances, the time frame within which certain action should be taken, that a sample once taken, immediately issues kicked in terms of human rights, in terms of data protection, protection of information held about an individual. So there has been a huge emphasis on that aspect of the issue as we have changed processes to ensure that there won't be a repeat of this exercise, of this issue. And in 1 week alone, when we arranged with FSI for a rearranged system for delivering samples to FSI, the number of samples delivered increased twofold. So, while there are issues in terms of the responsibility of each member, we also recognize that without proper systems put in place to assist members in bringing their investigations to a conclusion and ensuring that DNA samples are transmitted as speedily as possible, we run the danger of these sort of outcomes.
Are you satisfied? Are you satisfied that with the delay in the implementation of the IMS system, the IT-based system, that you are in a position to assure the authority that the risks which obviously have existed and you've identified in your report, that they are now being managed effectively in anticipation of the final rollout of the IMS system?
So far as we have now gone through the process of the merger with to transfer certain functions to FSI, and we all understand better what each other's function is, and we have a National Forensic Coordination Office within the newly structured Garda National Technical Bureau. where a number of people are on a daily basis monitoring these issues, and where anything untoward is noticed, it comes to immediate attention and is addressed by Detective Superintendent Brian O'Reilly and his team in the NFCO, as it is referred to within the Technical Bureau.
Yeah, and I think that's the significant issue for the authority is that the changes that are now being put in place, or that you have put in place, that you can give the appropriate assurance that the risks and indeed the reality of what happened in relation to the samples, and that there's little or no likelihood of that recurring.
Yes, indeed, and such changes as, for example, while the Commissioner has authority to, and he has delegated that authority to allow for the destruction of samples at a local level. We're insisting that that will be done by FSI, and every sample will go to FSI, even if the merits of or the particular circumstances of a case dictate that the sample should be destroyed. It will be destroyed by FSI, and that is the rule, that is the policy that has issued, that must be adhered to.
Are you satisfied? Sorry, are you satisfied that the process that you've put in place to ensure or to assure you that all of that has been happening, or that all of that is happening, and that the changes that you've made, that they are actually having the impact and the desired impact, the impact that you wanted to happen?
Yes, and the impact of some of the changes, as I described earlier, have been dramatic. By the setting up of a dedicated DNA desk rather than a desk at FSI for delivering a whole range of evidential samples, has greatly reduced the backlog, and was the single biggest influencing factor in reducing the backlog of samples that needed to be delivered and converted to profiles within the forensic science laboratory.
Great, thank you very much. I think my time is up, Chair. Thank you for that, Commissioner and Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you, Moling, and thank you, Commissioner and AC O'Driscoll. The issue of diversity, both in the composition of the Garda Síochána and importantly in the society as a whole, has been a topic of interest and engagement by the authority since its inception almost 5 years ago. And we've had a number of conversations on this topic in public and in private sessions. And we thought it timely to look again at this issue, to couple it with the general issue of equality and the obligations that poses for everybody. And also very specifically to look at the Section 42 duty that all public bodies, including the policing authority, but in this case including Garda Síochána, have in relation to human rights and equality, and to spend some time engaging with you, Commissioner, and your colleagues on these topics. And Paul McGeehan and Valerie Judge are going to engage with this team. I think Paul is going to start, if I'm right.
No, I think Valerie.
I beg your pardon. And I now have lost pictures, but that will come back. Valerie.
I wonder, have we lost Valerie? Sure.
I can't see her.
I think we have, Paul. Maybe if you
Okay.
can
Well, then maybe
go ahead.
maybe I'll start then.
Yeah.
Issue one is it might be termed, I suppose, an internal facing strategy, and that's the issue I think that Valerie's going to address when she gets back online. So I wanted to ask a few questions about the external facing strategy, which is the diversity and integration strategy. And I suppose the first question I just wanted to ask about that is the two strategies obviously contain similar themes, and I just wondered to what extent do those with responsibility for these strategies within the organisation engage with each other, and to what extent do the two strategies speak to each other?
Thank you. Well, I think the Americans have two different strategies, and it was really a matter of timing in that the diversity and integration strategy was ready to go, whereas our more internal-based equality, diversity, inclusion strategy was somewhat behind it. So we made a decision to go first with the diversity and integration strategy with the view to amalgamating the two strategies at the end of 2021. So we'll resolve this, particular presentational issue. But we did think that at the time it was important that there was, we had done important things in 2019 in respect of uniform, in respect of taking part in Gay Pride, the availability of the liveried vehicles, and other sort of signals that we put out around wanting to be seen to be an inclusive organisation. Just felt at that time we were making some momentum, and we wanted to push ahead with this. So the outward facing element of this, and a lot of this is then about our compliance with obviously Section 42 of the Human Rights and Equality Act 2014 and the positive duty that's imposed upon us. But we wanted to illustrate further action in terms of this strategy to reinforce actions that we had already taken. And so it was a very positive step. We followed that through then with hate crime definition. Hate crime then has been further emphasised the organisation with the update to the Pulse system, release 7.6, that took place in October, and that brings significant changes, allows us a more focused method of data collection in respect of hate crime, and that's been very significant to us around the recording of the intention of alleged perpetrators. So, and also then the Garda training initiatives were updated in respect of this as well, and subject also to human rights screening. So where this really coordinates, I would say, is through our existing human rights structures. They are led by John Toomey and myself. There's two sets of committees there that work and make sure then that both of these elements then are coordinated, but coordinated through the human rights framework. But it is our intention at the end of 2021, whenever we're writing the strategy 22 on to probably 25, that we'll combine these two elements, and we'll also then we'll be able to bring in a lot of the work that we've done in terms of policing within human rights framework, human rights screening tool, and the human rights training that we're introducing across the organisation as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And I mean, because one of the things that struck me was in reading some of the material in relation to this was, I mean, there's a Garda diversity forum which brings together a number of representatives of different groups in the community, and that's really part of the external facing strategy. But presumably there's an opportunity there as well in working with those groups to try to encourage applications to become members of the police from communities that might traditionally have been underrepresented.
Yes, and I think if either Joe or Alan is on the call, they can speak to the specific initiatives that we've entered into to encourage greater representation in terms of those who apply for and then ultimately are successful in joining Garda Síochána. And we just don't offer careers as Garda members or direct policing. There's a huge array of other functions in terms of Garda staff that individuals can take on. So we are a big employer. We'll be at 19,000 before when we finish out. So there is still opportunity for us to bring more diversity into the organisation. And in effect, one of the desires that we have is just to widen the pool of applicants. a wider pool of applicants actually gives us a greater pool of talent to draw upon. So it is to our benefit, and that's why we need to, in fairness, that's why the two strategies need to be brought together. And but as I've said, we didn't want to delay one to wait for the other.
Okay, and can I presume, sorry, I know, Alan, you might have been planning to come in there, but I think possibly Valerie might have some specific questions on this issue when she comes back. So I wonder if we...
I'm here, Paul, sorry.
Yeah, I think what we've decided to do, Valerie, is to proceed maybe with the external strategy, and then we can...
Apologies, I just had some technical issues there. Okay.
No, you mentioned, Commissioner, the issue of hate crime, and one of the indicators, I think, in the implementation plan for the external strategy was the delivery of clear guidelines for the identification and recording of hate crimes. Is that what you were discussing a few minutes ago when you said, has that now been achieved?
Yeah, so if I could refer to Paula and just the upgrade that we've done to Pulse, and this was a significant update, which allows us then to have a greater sort of clarity then on the hate crime incidents and motivation, etc. And that's just the latest edition that that was released in October.
Okay.
Paula?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Paul, as the Commissioner outlined, Pulse 76 has been an enabler for us in terms of recording hate crime and especially hate incidents where it hasn't reached the threshold for us. So for us going into 2021, we will be able to record those. But that itself is not a panacea. So we've had to ensure the enablement of the training to support the IT upgrade. So what we have done is we've focused on the key areas where we will need to deliver the training. And by that, I mean our frontline members who are attending calls, our call handlers, and our crime recorders. So the training has already started in terms of crime recording and call handling. The training, online training to our frontline members, is about to be rolled out imminently in the next week or so. They will all be required to undertake that training. We will monitor the completion of the training over the coming months, and the training is focused on three key areas. What the definition of a hate crime is, and the perception test, which is new to us in Garda Síochána. This is not about evidence. This is perception of the victim, the guard, or a connected third person. Focus on the definition. It's focusing then on a high level of investigation, and then thirdly, the support to the victim. And that's why we're also doing a separate piece of work around the housekeeping of and understanding where our diversity officers are and how we can align them to community policing teams to both do engagement and proactive engagement, but also support of hate crime. So that's the work we've done in terms of hate crime.
Thanks for that, Paula. And I just wonder then, maybe taking that a little bit further, because that seems to be quite significant progress in the recent past. And I wonder, when might diverse communities, begin to feel the impact of this change in the Garda approach to this issue?
Well, I hope that we're starting to see that really imminently. Our engagement, you referenced the External Diversity Forum. That forum has now sat twice. The constitution and the role of the forum has been widened to really, as well as monitoring, because there's also a monitoring role with yourselves and the authority, but as well as monitoring our performance, about acting as a critical friend type role and actually supporting our messaging in Garda Síochána about the only way to stop hate crime is to report it. So we're planning then as well, as we roll out our online reporting as well, that to have that's supported by a communication strategy and use the voices of others as well, because there's no stronger voice than the voice of minority communities themselves to say, please report this to Garda Síochána. So we're going to use both the Diversity Forum, other more informal accountability forums, engagement we do, with minority groups. But thirdly, we are going into the new year looking with how we more formally, and we referenced this at one of the last meetings, how we do get that more formal feedback wider in terms of through, is it public attitude survey, or do we do a separate survey? So we are looking at how we can best capture it in a more formal way as well, because that's in the strategy also.
Okay, thank you. And can I just move on, and I'm not sure, Paula, if it'll still be you or Commissioner, if it'll be yourself or someone else, to ask a couple of questions about the Section 42 public sector duty. I know there has been some engagement between yourselves and the Human Rights and Equality Commission in relation to sort of practical outworking of this duty on the Guards. And it is one, as the Chair has indicated earlier, it's one that falls on all public sector bodies. And I think looking at the guidance from the Human Rights Commission and indeed the statute itself, there are sort of three elements, if you like, to implementing this duty. One is the assessment of the equality and human rights issues relevant to your purpose and functions. One is then to address any issues that arise from that assessment, and then finally to report on progress made in relation to that assessment. Now, from my understanding, I think is, and I don't mean to be unfair in relation to this, that you're really at this stage at the assessment stage. Is that a fair view as to your engagement with Section 42 thus far?
Well, I'll bring Kate in a wee second. I would point to the fact that we have issued a human rights screening tool, and that then that is applied then to our training, and also then human rights is an integral part then of our decision-making model. So, you know, I do think we've moved significantly along the road in terms of making human rights integral to our working, the work that we do. It's part of the policing service for the future. There's specific recommendations in there. We would like to move faster, but the ability actually to tap into expert human rights legal advice is at times difficult, and that has slowed us down. At the same time, we have revised our approach to training with the use of the human rights screening tool. We have our own strategic committee that sits in respect of human rights, and then the operational committee as well, and they take on projects in a thematic way and have moved those along. So I would say there's a lot of work is actually is underway and is being done. But if I ask Kate to come in, Kate McLaren.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon. I'm also joined by our Chief Superintendent, Alan McGovern. So if I have any gaps in my presentation to you, I'm sure he'll leap in and assist me in this regard. We really certainly in Garda Legal appreciate the opportunity, number one, to highlight the architectural structures that, as you know, are now in place to support our Section 42 responsibilities. So the re-establishment of the track, as the Commissioner has said, and the internal cultural ethics and human rights board chaired by Deputy Toomey means that we have the very firm architecture in place. We also, as you know, starting from a very low base of personnel in human rights, have received the sanction from the authority and the department. As the Commissioner said, hiring in this market at such a low base of sanctioned salary is something I have to flag for you here this afternoon, because it's been such a significant impediment to us advancing this areas of work. But notwithstanding that, as the Commissioner said, we've published our human rights strategy statement, and we have really worked very, very closely with our colleagues across the key policy areas where the tools provided from the Human Rights Unit have enabled policy owners to really get to grips with the implementation, the practical implementation of their Section 42 requirements. And most significantly of all, I think operationally, is the advances we've made in training in human rights. So in January, we're about to commence a 12-module program with the University of Limerick. This is an accredited course, externally marked and externally validated, that together with human rights experts within policing. So in fact, as Assistant Commissioner Hillman is on this call, I will credit her as being the contributor, for instance, to the lecture on hate crime. So this is neither a purely academic model or indeed an internal model. And Moling, I think that addresses one of the issues of culture that you spoke about and touches on, that this is a collaborative venture. And Shane Kilcummins, the professor in charge of this project, described it as groundbreaking. It's the first time such a joint endeavour has been put in place, and the numbers are significant. We plan to train 500 managers, Garda staff, as well as Garda members and human rights champions in 12 weeks starting in January. And moreover, we have kept hold of and own the entire product. So we will be able to roll that out to all members of Garda Síochána in the very near distant future, because we will be rolling this out. Notwithstanding COVID, we will be sticking to remote learning, because we feel this is the best way of tapping into the advantages of having this module where people can work through in their own time, albeit guided and very significantly observed by the team in UL. So I think that that's very specific to a practical measure. But sorry.
I'm sorry to slightly cut across, but I'm conscious of our time, and certainly I think that's a positive and welcome development. I suppose what my question really relates specifically to the Section 42 duty, and it envisages, as you know, an annual report from public bodies in relation to the equality and human rights issues and actions that they've taken. When might we see such a report from yourselves, and what issues do you think are likely to feature in that?
It's anticipated, but that by the end of the year, we'll be in a position to report the strategic goals achieved by our human rights sector, much of which, in fact, virtually all of which, is pursuant to our Section 42 obligations. And specifically, to give you examples, and I know that the Policing Authority is represented on track, so I'm aware that you will be aware of advances we've made. But we, as part of the Smith Committee recommendations, reviewed our custody record assessment form, the additional protections of identifying vulnerable persons in custody settings. And that report will be available to the SHRAC meeting in December, and significant, I think, advances in our ability to assist our members in custody circumstances to identify a whole range of vulnerabilities, from neurodiversity through to other potentially difficult issues of addiction and mental health. And I think this is a very practical example of being able to show, number one, the significant numbers of persons, this won't come as any surprise to this group, in such circumstances with a multitude of vulnerabilities. Yeah. And I think that reporting on that vulnerability is, of course, a first stage, and training our staff in the identification of vulnerability. But the Commission made a point, and I think it's really well made, that the SHRAC committee and our internal committee as well puts together all of the parties working on these issues. We're not working on these alone. So if we're looking at vulnerabilities in suspects, we're also looking at them in victims, the work that Paula Hillman is doing in the hate crime area. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to learn from each other. And on Friday's meeting, myself and Alan McGovern met with Helen Hall on Friday. We got into a very deep discussion about the recording of data that will assist in the assessment of equality or otherwise. And that, again, is something that we have commissioned research on internally, taken outside expert human rights advice on, including asking the AG for advice on the issue of, and it is a difficult issue of recording such things as ethnicity, to establish robust data to determine whether or not there are any issues of unequal treatment. So I do think,
yeah. And I think, I'm sorry again, but I'm conscious I'm probably intruding into other people's time, but I think that is a critical issue and one that we would hope to revisit, because I think you're right that what Section 42 envisages clearly is an organisation measuring, gathering information, measuring the impact of its equality and human rights actions, and then trying to address any, as you say, any differentials in treatment that might arise from that examination. But anyway, I'm conscious that Valerie has questions to ask about the internal strategy, so I'll thank you very much, Kate, and thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you.
And Assistant Commissioner.
You're muted, Valerie.
Sorry, I had a few technical issues joining, so I missed the first few minutes there. So forgive me if I repeat anything that's been discussed already. Yeah, we've I suppose in the 5 years now we've been in existence here, we've discussed a number of times the question of diversity within the police service and the desirability that the service, be answered elsewhere, that the service would reflect the composition of society generally. And I know you're not the only police service struggling with this issue. I was just reading the London Met's most recent strategy, and it's remarkably similar, as you'd expect, to your own. Can I ask, first of all, in the area of recruitment, to what extent have any measures you've taken been successful in attracting a more diverse range of applicants? What have you done and how successful has it been? And I know you were to get some statistics, I think, from the Public Appointment Service. Did you get any of that data yet?
Could I refer to Alan or Joe there, please, in respect of that?
I come in. Can I just, hello, Valerie. Can I just first just let you know that the Commissioner next week will be launching the internal strategy, the EDI strategy. So that's the first thing. You'd be pleased to hear. And without going into huge detail on it, it'll be covering up to the end of next year, 2021, with a view of obviously combining the two. In relation to the action plan, is about an 11-point action plan. It covers things such as recruitment, training, data gathering, which is very important. The question you've asked there, Valerie, which we've had difficulty getting, as you know, even getting from the Public Appointment Service, and they are sending some stuff to us. They sent us data before, which I think we sent down to you in relation to people.
What's your general impression, Alan, in terms of measures you've taken? Maybe describe for people listening what measures you've taken and how successful it's been. And I do appreciate this is a challenge for all police services, which I suppose is all the more reason to try harder on it.
Well, in relation to recruiting there and the campaigns we had, we worked very closely with Paula's people in the community relations side of things, because as you know, they have ethnic officers and community liaison officers. So we worked very closely with them when we were doing the advertising, because they're actually out in the community, deal with different groups. We also, we in some of the publicity that we did some videos, etc., where we tried to come in and promote to attract more female and attract more ethnic groups. So we worked then with other groups in the schools and in the universities, and they some work with us too when we were advertising. So we kind of took as much opportunity, particularly internally, as we could. Public Appointment Service also, they have a new EDI officer, and they, through their own connections, they also try to engage with different communities that they would deal with from a recruiting perspective. It's hard to say. Well, obviously, it hasn't been as successful as we would like yet. There's, I think, a slight increase in the gender situation now. I think that before we started the recruitment, I think we were around maybe 25. I think we're up to fairly close to 30% female. Getting statistics itself has been difficult. The Public Appointment Service, who do the recruitment, say, for example, for us on the Garda training side of things, in the application form there is a section, okay, for ethnicity, but it's not mandatory. It's on a voluntary basis. So that has been obviously based on the statistics they've given us, and we had a discussion in another forum this morning, and Shirley Comerford, who's head of PASS, is interrogating the data. It would appear that we have a fall off on the ethnicity side from the first stage to the eventual number of people that we would get come in. I'm on a group, an expert group on learning and development, and one of the subgroups in that is looking at pathways, and a big emphasis we're putting on is how do we tackle this whole issue. And it was mentioned by the chair this morning, noted that as well.
It's very reassuring, and we we are aware, obviously it's very reassuring to hear you working closely with the Public Appointment Service and that they're focused on this as well. Can I ask, in terms of is there a final stage, you can clarify for me, is there a final stage in the process which is actually owned by your own organisation? Is there
the final stage for us? Yeah. Yes, there is, but that's final stage for us. There's 3 phases in it. There's medical, there's a physical competency test, and there's obviously vetting. So that's the phases that we would do.
Okay.
That's and it's only on that. But what I should add as well, to the as I said, is the action plan.
Just on that one, because there you would have some information. Now I know the ethnicity data is a difficult one, and we'll discuss that again, and progress is being made. But you have very good stats on gender. So in terms of the piece of the recruitment process that you're in control of, is there anything you've learned through your examination of the stats on the numbers coming through?
I think the stats show that in relation to the numbers that are actually the gender breakdown between male and female that apply for the jobs, there's no great fall off from the female side. Certainly that's what that would show. I suppose the big test for us on it is attracting more female people to apply for the job. We have a plan at the moment which we started. We're working on a roadmap, a recruiting roadmap. We have to have it by the end of the year. It's in the new strategy, but we already started it in relation to try to get a roadmap right across for the minority groups. So obviously, as part of that roadmap, we've worked very closely with Paul and our people, as I stated. We've worked closely with the Public Appointment Service. As I said, they have a new EDI officer now, and she's working very closely with us. On the communications front, Andrew McAlinden has been involved with us, and myself and Andrew, we got a little bit of research done for us by a company called Core, who went out and spoke to some of the minority groups, and they've given us feedback quite useful. We've also, as I said, got the Learning Expert Group who are looking at the new pathways, and a big part of theirs will be to look at the whole gender area and the other areas such as ethnicity.
Okay.
And they're taking on board.
I think without detailed statistics, it's pretty obvious that the ethnic groups aren't represented in the police service to the extent that they're represented elsewhere. But it's very positive to hear what you're doing about that, and we'll keep working together on that. When people have been recruited and join, and where you have stats, I'm looking at the gender figures, and I'm wondering how appealing a career prospect in the police or in the Garda Síochána is for a young woman who might be considering it, when she sees that at Garda level, the number of women is 29%, at Sergeant it's 23%, at Inspector it's 18%, and at Super only 11% are women. Does that appear like an attractive career proposition to people, to young women who have options?
Absolutely, and I mean, I think it's something that I know, being a civil servant myself, from being in previous departments. It was an issue when I started off my career. That was kind of we had the same problem in the main civil service. So again, one of the actions that we have on that is to review and get out there and try find behind it, find out why this is happening.
Why is it?
I think some of the stats is probably in relation to getting people to even apply for the competition.
And why are they not applying?
I presume, I'm only assuming this because we haven't done the research yet, but certainly from the feedback we've got, it's maybe family issues.
Did the culture audit pick up anything in that regard? I mean, if you look at other professions, there can be a fall off, but if you look at, say, the medical profession, where there once was a greater fall off, that's been largely eliminated at this stage, and other similar professions. So where there are challenges around shift work, etc., similarly to the Garda Síochána. So did your culture audit tell you anything about
things, such as which is important, such as family friendly and making that more available and more attractive? We did have a session, there's no doubt about it, on the sworn side and Garda members, that it was much more difficult to get family friendly, but I think that's changing too, and I think that will certainly help.
Can I challenge you a little bit, Alan, because I think it's well recognised in most organisations that where a woman is ambitious, childcare ceases to become an issue, because where somebody sees opportunity, is ambitious and goes for promotion, these things may be managed, and there are societal and cultural issues. But Garda Síochána lives in the same world as, we'll say, the medical profession or other professions, where these barriers are being overcome. So what do you think might be in your policing plan for next year and in your strategy that you've mentioned that might specifically address this issue, and both for the reasons of the service reflecting the society and the attractiveness of a career path? Because when you go back to recruitment and people consider joining an organisation, they will look at its culture and they will look at career prospects.
Yeah, well, as I said, one of the things we're going to do is we're actually going to look at it and have a strategy for it. And I suppose we won't reinvent the wheel. We'd probably do what other organisations did. So, for example, what helped in mainstream departments was that not only when women got promoted, they weren't put kind of into peripheral jobs, they were put into the bigger jobs that might be a little bit easier to make a name for yourself, for want of a better word. I seen that myself when I worked in the Department of Social Protection. That was one of the plans that the Social Protection brought in. So I think that's important in Garda Commissioner, and I think we've already started to do that. So what I mean by that is that...
In what way are you doing?
Well, in relation to the bigger operational posts, that it doesn't always have to be male, that we have females there. I think some of the recent decisions made by the Commissioner are very helpful. I think, for example, that the Assistant Commissioner over the DMR, which is one of the biggest profile operational areas we have, is now headed by a woman. I think it's great.
Can I ask you a question, Alan? Because I'm hearing, and I may be wrong, but what I'm hearing is a suggestion that there's a culture by default that certain positions go to men, not women.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you there, Valerie, you broke.
Sorry, sorry about that. No, what I'm hearing, and I may be wrong, but it sounds to me like there's something in the culture that accepts that certain positions are by default positions for men. Would that
no, we wouldn't. I don't think that's the situation now, and that's what I said to you. I think the strides that we've made in recent years has demonstrated that. I do think in the past, certainly from talking to colleagues, I think out the cultural audit as well, there probably was that perception. Yes, I suppose it was kind of similar to the perception that was often there, even forgetting about gender, that maybe people that were involved, guards involved in community policing compared to detectives, were at a disadvantage. But I think policing organisations, not just ourselves, but other policing organisations, like for example, myself and Paul are part of a group now looking at diversity group with PSNI, the Met, Police Scotland, etc. And you're right, they're the type of issues that they had in the past, of these perceptions, not just on the gender basis, but on other basis, which is the better areas to be in. And I mean, the only way you can tackle that is to make sure, first of all, to be aware of it, and then in relation to education policy, etc., that you deal with it.
Okay, I was reading there in the Met report, one of their recent reports, that where 30% of constables were women, only 3% of the 30% were from ethnic minorities. There was a greater proportion of the men from ethnic minorities. So it goes to show that even when you have the data and it tells you what you already know, there's a road to be travelled here. It's heartening, I think, for the authority to hear that you're working with these other organisations. They face the same challenges, and maybe there's some quick learning you can get from that direction. There was talk at some stage about creating a women in policing network. Has that progressed?
Yes, it has. Yes, that's been headed up. It was set up by Chief Superintendent Margaret Nugent. So that's working away. And I also know that there's a European network which female members participate in. So that's there. I might add, just in relation to the recruitment bit, that we as part of our roadmap, we've actually spoken to a lot of groups. So for example, next week we've got Zoom meetings with 7 different groups. It would include women's groups, it would include gender groups, it would include the Immigrant Council of Ireland, etc. We're also doing that, I think the people bringing it in. The piece of research, what it showed us in relation to barriers for communities, social and economic one tends to be, I suppose it is a cultural thing there, in that there's not a great relationship in all areas in some of these communities with the police, and one is considered to be a tout or a rat of support that was used, that came back to some of the people that spoke to, that's severe, that's what happened if you engage with the police organisation. So we've got to get down, and that's what came from it there, is that the Garda have to get out there, meet and greet, and we're doing that. Honest people are doing it. Interestingly, in relation to a lot of the ethnic stuff, and I don't think anybody at the meeting will be surprised, a lot of these people are coming from countries where there wouldn't be a great trust in the police service. So it's trying to, again, encourage people.
And many of them come from a country, which is our own country, where they may not be trusting the police service. So when we talk about ethnic minorities, I think we need to not be guilty of placing everybody in one category. We're talking about great diversity in terms of minority groups across the country. I suppose
we're going to have to draw this to a close, I'm afraid.
Are we? Okay, sorry, Chair.
Last question, go on.
Again, but I do want to say well done on what you are doing, and I think we'll be watching this closely over the next while.
We'll get out the strategy next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, can I make one comment there? Just
please do, Commissioner, please do.
Yeah, well, it's just the point about the learning from the other organisations that we're engaged with. For instance, there's a very interesting piece of work that Deloitte did in respect of PSNI in terms of gender and the attraction of a police service as a job, and it speaks to a lot of the points. Now, I think if you don't have a relative or a close friend working in a policing organisation, we're a bit of an enigma. People don't really understand our career progression or specialism, and particularly female applicants were interested in not the pay, but what the prospects were, what the career prospects were, and you know, there's quite detailed work which did comparative work between the genders. So that tells us specific things we need to say about, you know, not just promotions, but also then specialisation and career development. The other thing I would say, in respect of the pass now periods, and doubtless the chair has noticed this herself, you're given a bit of a sheet which gives you country of origin, and we do have a good spread of people coming in who have been born outside of the state, with good European representation, some from the USA and Great Britain as well. And I think probably we could even just aggregate those figures up, and it'll give some illustration of at least the diversity in terms of country of origin, if I put it that way as well. But there is a lot of learning that even we can pick up from the National Black Police Association in England, Wales, and they are very keen to share their experience with us. And that was made. That offer was made to me personally as well. So there's a lot that we can do. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and indeed a lot of research that's been done would be very applicable to us, if not completely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's it's reassuring to hear you make that intervention and to hear what you say. Thank you to Valerie and Paul. This is an issue, as I said, with which we have been involved from the outset, and with which we will continue to be involved. There are significant questions, and picking up a point that Valerie made, underrepresentation is a very widespread phenomenon. It is not just about ethnicity and gender, as we know. There are other areas of society that are underrepresented, not just in the Guards, but in very many other institutional organisations. But thank you for that. Our next theme is the policing in COVID-19, and Vicky Conway is going to lead on this.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, obviously a lot of people will be very aware of the announcements made in the last day or so regarding the fines that are being introduced in terms of COVID. Can you give us some indication about how An Garda Síochána intends to approach this matter and the introduction of fines?
Well, if I could just step back one and say, I know there's a lot of focus on our enforcement around COVID-19 regulations, but I could also emphasise our approach in respect of organised crime, our approach in respect of domestic abuse, and this is the first of 16 days of action around preventing violence against women, but also then our community support as well. And I think those two areas around tackling domestic abuse, that's long-term work, and what we've learned from the community support, that'll stand us in good stead. And when we get through this and look back, I think those will be the positive things. The enforcement of the regulations and our support for the government action in respect of the various levels of containment around COVID-19, obviously we're brought into an enforcement space. But the introduction of fixed charge penalty notices does not change one iota the approach of the 4 E's. We are there in the first place to explain, to educate, to encourage compliance, and it's only then at the very last resort that we'll be moving to a place of enforcement. And even though fixed charge penalty notices will become available in time, they haven't been fully processed in terms of their introduction. That'll probably be next week. It will be tail end of next week. And so we will still be carrying on the approach that we've taken for the rest of this week and the incoming weekend as well. Well, what we would say is that we have seen ongoing compliance by the public, where there have been issues flagged up in terms of even the evening economy, which has started to build up around people out to see the Christmas decorations and shop fronts decorated, etc. By and large, that has been very compliant and good-natured, and really minimal public order issues for ourselves to deal with. And it's a tribute to people and just the way that they have acted in the great majority. There, of course, there's always individuals who just, as I've said before, make poor decisions, and obviously then we have to intervene in some shape or form. But that's part of the policing function, and enforcement then inevitably will follow. But in terms of the COVID-19 regulations, our overall strategy around the 4 E's still remains. I think it's kept us in good stead around maintaining public confidence, but also maintaining support and public compliance around the regulations. So that's not going to change.
Right, and I think, you know, police authority supports that approach, that this is not an issue that we police our way out of. And it's good to hear you reference Operation Fuchsia, which I think has been one of the most successful aspects of all of this, and really impressive strides have been made in that regard. In some of the engagement that the Executive Authority has been doing with different groups and organisations, one question that has arisen in relation to the application of the 4 E's is consistency, and people questioning whether or not things are happening, you know, for all in the same sector at the same scale and rate. How do you assure yourself that there is consistency across all divisions in the application and enforcement of the regulations?
I would point particularly to the work of the Deputy Police and Security, John, in respect of his ongoing close supervision. Like, we get a report on this where all the regional ACs and support ACs gather together with Andrew Sullivan to give us direct feed and information, and we know virtually each incident. We go through each one. Thankfully, the number of incidents is relatively minor or relatively low, and we're able then to keep almost a personal track on various incidents. So I would say that one of the areas which we didn't expect to be probably as persistently difficult has been around retail, and some elements of retail not abiding within the regulations. The great majority of retailers are compliant, some aren't, and we're now at the place of reporting those retail outlets to the Director of Public Prosecutions for the breach of the regulations. But we would say we followed the 4 E's, we provide due warning, and then at that point we've moved on to enforcement. And I really don't believe there's been a difference in approach nationally, because we have all heard what is happening in each region, and there is a reference point then that we have against action elsewhere, and also the views of the Director of Public Prosecution in respect of the evidence that we're putting forward.
I'll just ask one final question, because I know we're tight on time. Can I ask, what is the position regarding the review of the use of anti-spitwoods? I understand that I was to receive that this morning, but didn't. I understand it's complete. I haven't had time to consider it, but I should be in a position to share it with you for the next authority meeting. Okay, well, it's good to hear that it's complete, and we look forward to discussing that further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Does anybody else wish to make any intervention on this? Judith.
Thanks, Chair. It was really, Commissioner, just to ask a question about looking ahead and the economic impact of COVID and the potential impact on crime patterns. Some work has been done in other jurisdictions around that. Is anyone looking at the the real impact in terms of poverty, unemployment, social deprivation, vulnerability, and the potential impact that that may have on crime patterns going forward?
Yes, thank you. Both the UN and Interpol have provided guidance for what they believe is, the next element. People talk about the epidemic of domestic abuse, the unreported epidemic of domestic abuse, for instance, and that undoubtedly is the case. But we identified that early from the work that Europol and indeed Interpol flagged up. So similarly, then we are looking towards organised crime trends, but also then other trends. And Interpol and the UN's work give us an indication of what our crime trends might be 2 to 3 months out now. But I think we have a solid base in terms of the work that we've done around organised crime groups through the work of John O'Driscoll, but also the work of Optara in each of the divisions. We've put a lot of pressure on both drug traffickers, also human trafficking, but also then local drug trading and street level dealing. And that has all brought benefits in terms of detections. Probably twice the amount of criminal cash, actual hard cash seized this year than last year. We're in around 18 million euro seized this year. So very significant sum of money as well. So the patterns that are being identified to us, we feel we've got ahead of the game. The next bit then is just further work in respect of domestic abuse. We have all our divisional protective service units in place. We've received sanction then this week only then for inspectors, and that then allows us further backfill. And as you know, we've appointed inspectors then to each of the protective service units at division. So we'll keep on just lifting our capacity. And then we have to follow through, obviously, with the necessary training and expertise. But if you look towards the prosecution of coercive control, only 2 weeks ago we had the first conviction on indictment, and that was very well received. Now we've had a number. I think we're at 3 or 4 successful prosecutions, so we really have a good idea around the necessary proofs and to follow through on that. So I think we're in a good place. And the other issue then also being flagged up is in terms of online fraud, and that's undoubtedly a problem. This is a worldwide problem in terms of both email scams, but also text message scams as well. And we took part, or were party to a bank anti-crime and crime prevention advice around fraud there only 2 weeks ago as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Commissioner. And I think that the series of reports that the authority has submitted to the Minister and has published, those reports have captured very effectively, I think, the full range of the Garda Síochána's engagement during this period, both the specific issues in relation to the regulatory environment, but also the broader work and the extent of the appreciation of the vast majority of people with whom the authority has been engaged, and with the organisations who either represent them or provide services to them. It has been a striking period for everybody, and we've done it already at a number of previous meetings, but we will again in the new year. I have no doubt, looking onward into the future, engage with you on the long-term issues, the long-term lessons that can be learned in terms of the way the Garda Síochána engages with the community, and realising the full potential of the very positive dimensions, and learning also from the experience of those whose response may not have been as enthusiastic as the great majority. We're moving on now to the Commissioner's report, and Pat Costello is going to lead on this, Commissioner.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, first of all, thank you very much for the comprehensive report, and there's a lot of information in it, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much for that. First thing I want to say is to acknowledge the policing successes that you've had. I've lost everybody on the screen. I presume you're still there.
Yes, still there.
Okay. And so well done on the policing successes. And move on maybe to finance, in particular ICT And it's not a question because we don't have time to go into it in detail. I want to make a few comments though. I do note we note the underspend on ICT so far on the year to date, but that is going to be picked up. In other words, the money is going to be spent by the year end, and that's good. That's positive. I suppose the concern that the authority have was in relation to ICT capital expenditure, and the policing authority is supportive of increases in capital expenditure over the next number of years. And you know that we've put that in print and written about it. At the private meeting, Joe has told us that there is engagement now with DEPR and other departments on the issue of increasing capital expenditure on ICT, which is backed up then by strong written submissions, which are now going to be shared with the authority. I suppose that we acknowledge it's always a challenge for any organisation to receive funding for capital ICT projects because it's very expensive. So, the case really has to be compelling. So we do look forward to continuing to engage. I think it's really, really important that ICT capital expenditure is increased over the next number of years. But I think there's a fight to get the resources to do that, and obviously a lot of decisions we made in how to do it. We have things like a finance system and a HR system that's not fit for purpose at the moment, and would be a priority going forward. So I just want to make that comment, not necessarily looking for a response unless you want to respond, but we will be having discussions, particularly at committee level and back on the board at next meeting.
Pat, just in response to that, and obviously ICT is very important to us, and I think the conversation that Joe was referring to was specifically, it's not just about the utility of the system and the increase in the effectiveness of the service, it's also the ability to be able to draw management information off that to increase the efficiency of what we do. So, the new CAD, CAD2, the command control system, the investigation management system, RDMS, will all give us information about demand and where we spend our time. And that's essential then if we are to build up a policing plan, which is relative then to the resources and the costed policing plan. But we need a good deal more insight into how we're spending our time against what demand. And it's really these systems that will deliver that. I don't think that's really been said enough in terms of these systems. They will do an awful lot of good in terms of improving our service, but they'll also inform us a lot in terms of management decisions that we want to make as well. Thanks.
And in fairness, I think the two videos that Andrew and Joe showed us at committee level, I think captured what you're trying to achieve in information-led policing, and it really needed, so that was very, very good. Just on the state, just one question on that. Because of COVID-19 and delays, and not so much now in lockdown, it was on their back. But how do you feel you're doing on an OPW doing it for you on Military Road versus being available with Harcourt Street, the lease coming up to finish on that?
Could I ask Joe just to comment on the present position around that, please?
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, Pat, all still going according to plan. We met with the OPW as late as last Friday. They're very satisfied with the progress that's been made. So far, so good. So at this stage, all you can see is a big hole in the ground, but that big hole in the ground is actually needed, but it's moving on well.
You're going down deep. Good, excellent. Maybe move on to the Garda decision-making model, and I was very pleased to see that something we've been on about and annoying you about, probably the e-learning materials are now produced and ready. But I was just wondering why there was a comment in the Commissioner's report as there would be a delay in rolling it out because of COVID-19. I just would have thought with the e-learning model that it wouldn't be delayed by COVID-19. Did I misread that?
I think actually it's a demand for the e-learning products, and part of the e-learning effort, one has been directed towards the student Gardaí, and two has been directed also towards the protective service units. So there's a huge demand for the e-learning, and it seems it's one of the means by which we're meeting obviously our huge training requirement. And I know that we've had to put an emphasis on the student, particularly the student learning piece, which had to be turned around literally in weeks. But also then, as we've enlarged the protective services, that also put a lot of pressure on. But perhaps you also a bit of insight in terms of the prioritization there.
Joe coming in now?
I think AC Clavin was going to talk to it.
Yeah. So, Chair, can I just say that in relation to the e-learning, last week I recorded my intro piece for it, and all that was left to be done at that stage was human rights. I think the biggest concern for us is more about extraction in terms of all hands on deck during the current period at the beginning of January. So we're in a really good position that this will be ready to go online early in the new year. We've our work done in the background.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll move on very quickly to the Code of Ethics, and we note the workshops are not completed for obvious reasons with the COVID-19, but do want to acknowledge, though, small things like the provision of lanyards, which I've seen. We ordered a copy of them with the 9 principles of the Code of Ethics on them. I think that's very good and to be welcomed. And small things like that, the same in the mouse mats, you had the 9 principles of the Code of Ethics on it. So they all do make a difference, and it's a continuous reinforcement of the message. So we do appreciate that. Just on the cultural audit, a note in the report as well that you've making progress on the tender, and you mentioned the amount of money and all that. Just any update on when the cultural audit will commence? I know it's next year in 2021. Any idea when it might happen in 2021?
Look, Joe or Alan there, please.
Okay, sorry, I'll come back in.
Oh, right. Sorry, Pat.
Sorry, Commissioner. Just all I can say is that it's our intention that the tender will issue next month, and that probably in the second half of 2021 is what we expect.
Okay. Thanks very much. Just a question on, you mentioned the report about the Garda recruits intake over the summer, May and June, and that they were the first recruits to undergo a new blended training process. So just wondering, can someone maybe tell us how that went? Has it been delivered okay? And are there any changes you would make if you don't have the COVID problem? Hopefully we won't have the COVID problem into next year. Are there any learnings from it? So the training of the new recruits, how that went.
Alan?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly the feedback is quite good in the Pat. We're doing a lessons learned on it at the moment, and I think what it'll absolutely mean is that from now on it will have changed how we will train recruits. So any lessons learned we'll take forward. I think one of the good things probably that came out of COVID, and often in a crisis it's not always bad, you get a few positive things in after the wars there, all the advances in medicine and stuff. I think from a training point of view, the way we train going forward, the use of e-learning and smarter ways of doing it, and feeding into that group I mentioned, I certainly think that has speeded it up by a number of years. No doubt about that. We've at the moment, there was 2 classes with methodology, 2 classes of 75. Yeah. One of the classes have to come back, hopefully in January, for 4 weeks before they can be attested. Like I said, the feedback we're getting certainly from the chiefs and from the college themselves is quite good and quite positive. And then the second class, then when that's finished, the second class of 75 will come back in. Air out, as you know, they're not actually attested there, so they're assisting and they're being assisted, which is important. And we've put a lot of evidence there that the CPD sergeants, they're one of the people that we did redeploy. We've left them in the CPD schools with the strict kind of instruction that they look after and make sure the recruits look after. But to answer your question, we're certainly the feedback I'm getting from the college, certainly the feedback we're getting back from the operations is that there is a lot of positive things that are coming out of it, and it will influence how we train our recruits going forward.
That's good. That's good. I'll move on to internal and external communications, and the external. I must say it's very impressive. I've heard a lot of your people on the airways, particularly after an incident or murder investigation or whatever. And so that's very, very good. I think you're very good at getting out, reassuring and communication with the general public. That's good. And I can see the progress being made on the internal, the Newsbeat. I must say that's been around a while, but the readership is very, very impressive there. And the COVID-19 weekly newsletter, that's very good. So, and you've been shortlisted for an award. So all that's very, very positive.
I think we might have won that award, actually.
You did, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I thought I just saw shortlisted. Well, maybe it was since that. Well done.
Yeah, since then.
Well done. On the challenge of communication, Commissioner, one of the first questions I asked you, and you quite rightly, I think, said that in trying to achieve cultural change in your 5-year term, what was one of the biggest challenges? And you said communication. So I'm interested in the internal communication. So just from your own perspective, how do you think it's going, and yourself and the management team, and getting that message across on what you want to communicate in your journey for a new culture within the organisation?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways into it. I do worry about communication in the organisation during the last 7-8 months. It was very difficult to meet people. We've had no sort of gatherings of the chief superintendents or the superintendents. When you go to a station, if you visit a station, it's not as if you can bring together 20 or 30 people in the canteen to have a town hall meeting with them. That's just, all of that stopped. So the personal interaction has just literally been one-to-one. Hasn't stopped us getting out and about, but I do think that in a policing business, which is such a human endeavour, some of the necessary communication has been, just because of COVID-19, a little bit more remote. So but I don't think we're any different than any other, big organisation in having to face that. But I think one of the central things for us is the manner and the service that we provide, and the pride that we can take in that service. And I think COVID-19 and the awful thing that it is, like, we ourselves have found a very strong function in terms of the service that we provide and the actual difference that we can make. Like, our work actually isn't ancillary, it actually can make an impact, and that's been very positive for the organisation and for everybody's hard work, and the example that they've set in local communities, etc. That's been positive for us. So we need to take that and then develop it on further. And I think just collectively, one of the barometers around this is just when you go around stations, people are very positive about the shift system, very positive about the additional vehicles, very positive actually about the public's response to them. They by and large, they get a very warm response from the public, and all of those are good in terms of just people's own self-worth and indeed their morale at work. So all of that's very positive. What we have to do then is just keep on sustaining that practical support, but also organisational clarity around what we want them to do. And I think, we've touched briefly on the policing plan earlier. Like, the policing plan should bring clarity to people about what they're going to do once we get out of COVID-19. But some of that is already set. We are going to concentrate on the protection of those who are vulnerable in society from, say, domestic abuse, serious sexual assault, cybercrime, including child abuse online, but then also the importance of community policing, the support for those that we've already developed a relationship with, whilst also making this a hard place for organised crime to operate, and particularly drugs intimidation. So there's a lot about our performance which is directly related to our culture, and I think this is just it's been a good year for advancing that forward.
Okay, well done, and we can see the progress. Maybe move on. I have one last question. With the time, I was interested in the Garda strength statistics within the report. There's a very small line in it about there's only 14 people, where your 14 people are. They're seconded abroad, overseas. And I remember asking this question, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and you were telling us that number, you expect that number to increase.
Yes.
That you would have more of your people with other police services abroad in terms of providing intelligence information and liaison. So I thought the figures might have gone up. That's what I'm asking the question. So is this happening, or is it still planned that will happen?
It is happening. We will soon be appointing an individual to, if it hasn't happened already, actually, to Washington, and also then that'll lead out then to an appointment to South America. Also then, we've undertaken work with Interpol around cybercrime, and I think that too will lead to a secondment to their cybercrime hub as well. So we do want to be outward facing. That word's going around our partners, be it Europol and Interpol, but also the Department of Foreign Affairs. That we're here to put up our hand and actually develop relationships which are good for ourselves, but also good for Ireland Incorporated in terms of the manner in which we help other nations and in partnership work with them.
and people from this island are very good at that, which leads me on to, within that group, I presume it includes the people you have seconded to UN policing missions,
Yes.
in Cyprus, for example. And I was just looking at what's going on in that area. I was particularly interested with my own background, and there, it seems from the United Nations website, there are 11,000 UN police operating in 14 countries, 14 missions around the world, and they're drawn from 90 countries. And why is it important? I think, you know, contributing to world peace. I think learning as an organisation from other police services, leadership development, and enhancing the reputation of Garda Síochána and Ireland's reputation. So you only seem to have a handful of people from that stat. If you take away the people who are with police services, but with the UN itself, I know it's a government decision, and this is just my opinion. I was just surprised at how low the number is. And is that something that you are considering bringing to the table when you're speaking to your colleagues in government?
In fact, we have put our hand up to say that we're prepared and willing to do more, and that offer has been made, and you know, it's then for the department then to where they want to then seek our deployment. So we've made it very clear. All the positive you've outlined, that's very much our position as well, and we think it's important for all the reasons that you've set out, and just, you know, then in effect. We're waiting for a call up.
You're ready. Excellent.
Yes,
thanks,
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Commissioner. And just for those who may not have caught the reference to the recent award, it was the fact that the Gardaí and the HSE shared the EY Entrepreneur of the Year award for what they described as selfless commitment and contributions which helped protect vulnerable members of the Irish society during the pandemic. So I was going to mention this at the end, but let's do it now when it's fresh in our memories. It was a well-deserved award, and our congratulations on that. The next issue that we want to look at is another that has been a subject of discussion at very many meetings of the authority and at very many committee engagements over the last 3 years or more. And it is the Homicide Review, and Judith Gillespie, I see Judith on the screen now, is going to lead on this. Judith.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner. And as you've said, Chair, this was first raised with the authority in March 2017 as a data classification issue regarding some domestic homicides. But when there was further probing into this, it became clear that there were significant risks to the organisation and some systemic issues around training, policy, procedure, data quality, and indeed investigative issues. So we, as an authority, we very much welcomed the energy and the thoroughness and the integrity of the Homicide Investigation Review team and the fulsome reporting to the authority and the 21 recommendations that the team identified. And they did say that the risks remain until all 21 recommendations are implemented. So as an authority, we're now at a stage, or have been at a stage for some months now, where we ideally want to finalise this piece of work, and not just for good governance, but probably much more importantly to ensure that the most serious violent crimes are being effectively investigated and recorded. So just to ask you, Commissioner, 3.5 years on, how would you characterise the degree of progress against the recommendations and your own personal high-level overview of progress against the 21 recommendations, please?
Well, thank you, Judith. Yes, there's a huge amount of effort has gone into this area, as is appropriate, because the investigation, not only of homicide, but other serious offences, is integral to our work. Now, as you say, there's 21 recommendations were made. Deputy Commissioner Toomey then oversees the implementation of those. I have a very detailed spreadsheet on just where those are in terms of their development. Some of them are related to
Commissioner. So
all right, okay. Well, where this is then, in short, is the investigation management system's being rolled out. The training for senior investigating officers that also has been rolled out, and within that then is the necessity then of peer-to-peer reviews, and we're also then building up our capacity then around serious case reviews, and peer-to-peer reviews have to commence then for the year 2018. I know that's already been asked, but we'll be seeking not only do a review of unsolved homicides, but also look at some of the rape and other serious sexual assault where we haven't identified or charged a perpetrator. So homicide and other serious investigations, they are complex pieces of work, particularly complex and difficult then if you're delivering them on a predominantly paper-based system. We're moving away from that with the investigation management system. Regrettably, COVID-19 has slowed that down somewhat because there's a lot of face-to-face training needed in that. So there's still a considerable work around the IT upgrade for that's rolled out right across the whole service. But the training piece and then the culture around peer-to-peer, that's the second piece of that. I know that the peer-to-peer work has commenced around, or is commencing around unsolved homicides and serious sexual assaults. So all of that is good, but I'd also point to the success that we have around the clearance of and the identification, bring to justice those engaged in serious offences. You know, there's a constant drumbeat of good cases being brought before the courts and good detections as well. And I think, you know, even recent detections have shown the tenacity with which these investigations are undertaken. But they've also illustrated throughout the organisation the importance of reviews and an independent eye running over the work to make sure that it's in a good place. So, like, we would say overall, huge amount of work went in this, was appropriate, that we're culturally, this is in a better place where this is seen to be a team effort, and a team effort that can benefit from independent examination as well.
And all that's really good to hear, and absolutely recognise the excellent work that has been done on recent homicide investigations. It would be remiss not to say well done on those. Can I ask you then a question of detail? One of the issues that came out of the review, and maybe it's not for you to answer, maybe it's for one of your team to answer, but was the issue of duplicate records. And just for anyone who's really not familiar with this type of thing, if an individual has multiple entries on Pulse, that exposes the organisation to all sorts of risk around preventing, investigating crime, vetting, public protection, data protection, privacy, records destruction, etc. So multiple identities on Pulse, multiple entries in Pulse is a high risk issue. And I know in some areas merge teams have been established, but that's not right across the piece. So there must be still on your system considerable multiple entries for single individuals. How is that risk being managed?
Can I look to John Toomey, please, on that? Because I know there's work going on that, but John may have some of the detail in respect of the merge teams. Thanks, John.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we have merge teams, and we have a lot of work done in terms of the establishment of those merge teams in each of the divisions. And we have set up, as part of our ICT prioritisation board, this particular piece of work. We have recruited a new project manager who will come into the organisation on January 2020 with this specific piece of work, specific task in mind. We have run some workshops as to how best to go around this particular issue, and we have identified what that process would be and how that will work out. And we have identified, and we do identify some works and lists of these areas in terms of locations, in terms of persons, and we issue those reports to our organisations. And we have a person matching functionality currently being introduced to address those issues. So there's a number of areas and there's a number of pieces of work that are being they're either in place or being rolled out or being enhanced to address the risks that you talk about. It is an important piece of work, and it is an ongoing piece of work. and every one of our Pulse releases, and we've issued Pulse 7.6, every release improves and enhances our recording ability in this particular area. And we do expect that we will make considerable progress with the hiring of this staff, with the introduction of this additional functionality, and then with the full rollout of these merged teams. And we did look at, or we are looking at Meath West Meath as being the initial area we're piloting on that. I think we have on our call our CIO, who may be able to add some of the more technical elements to that work. But broadly speaking, they're the kind of main strands of work that we have in place to mitigate and to address the risks that you talk about.
Okay, thanks very much for that, John. Can I ask then just a couple more questions, if I may, Chair? The errors that were uncovered in the categorisation and indeed in the investigation, they happened when you had training in place, when you had policies in place, when you had presumably supervision in place. So what is different now, and how can you be absolutely sure, insofar as you can ever be sure of anything, that the sort of basket of these cases isn't filling again?
Okay, can I look to John there, please?
Well, I think what we have done over the recent time is we've improved our training, we've improved our policies, we've enhanced our procedures, we've looked at the crime classification and the IT, and we have brought a suite of improvements. It is intended that down the road we will do another review to ensure that all of these improvements that we talk about bring about and achieve the objectives that we talk about. And I suppose to answer your question, it's on completion of that audit and that review when we will absolutely give ourselves complete satisfaction. But what we're doing in the interim, and in addition to looking at there is ongoing assessments, and as part of our performance and accountability work, and part of IMS, all of these improvements bring about in better processes, procedures, and greater oversight and a greater ability for improved governance in this area. It's an ongoing piece of work. We do think the communications around this, we do think the enhanced policy, some of them were IT fixes, some of them were training fixes, and we have made all of those changes. And then at each level of our supervision, they're all tasked and fully aware of the issues that have been identified. So on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly basis, in all of our governance processes, that's where and that's how we will ensure that these issues do not arise again. But it will be when we complete an audit, probably in 12 months down the road, to give us that complete, total, absolute assurance.
I was just going to ask you when you would be likely to be doing that review and what it would look like. I think the authority would be very interested to know what you're planning. Can you just say a little bit more about that, and then I will leave this.
Well, I suppose the first piece of work that we have to do, and as you're aware, you mentioned the 21 recommendations, and there's 10 of those to be completed, and we have sent down the spreadsheet as to the timelines for some of those. There's only 3 of those that are kind of causing us any little bit of concern and that are slightly off target. We do need to give all of those new policies, procedures time then to bed in, while we continually to monitor them, continually provide that governance and that oversight. I would expect that it would probably be in the region of about 12 months when we will do a more formal review. We will do it through the auspices of the Professional Standards Unit, be supported by John O'Driscoll and by his team, bringing that expertise to it. And we will develop the terms of reference in the interim, and of course the policing authority will have full line of sight of that. One crucial piece of this, which is very near completion, are the peer-to-peer reviews. And while the Commissioner talked about, we have commenced and are in the process now of commencing doing a specific review on 2018 from an operational perspective. The policy that will issue in the near future will put a formal structure around that peer review of those serious suspicious deaths and serious sexual assault cases, and indeed any other serious cases of note. So a lot of work has been done and a lot of movements have been made. But coming back to your question, we expect that it will take 12 months for those to bed in, and that we will do a review commencing in around that time.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And just to say, the peer-to-peer reviews is something really tangible and positive, and it's really good to hear that that has come out of this, and indeed that you're not just looking at homicides but also unsolved rapes. We really welcome that, and well done on that. We'll be interested to hear the outcome of those in due course and any learning from them. But thank you very much for now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Judith. I think this whole episode of the homicide investigation process has been a striking example of the value of external independent oversight and of the real value of open, honest, internal organizational review. Had there not been a persistent external oversight body, we might not be where we are. You might not be where you are in terms of the extent of the learning and the extent of the new experience that has been gained. And it has been, to that extent, a really valuable experience, I think, for the Garda Síochána and certainly for the policing authority. And we will maintain our interest in it, and will, through the course of 2021, engage regularly with you, Commissioner, and your colleagues, so that we can identify the progress of the review and we hope at some stage satisfactorily be able to place this item as in the success category and not have to revisit it as often as we have done. But this has been, it has been an extraordinarily productive exercise despite the complexity of its origins. The final item on the today's agenda is the anti-corruption initiative that you took, Commissioner, and Debbie Donnelly is going to lead on this.
Good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. We're nearly there this afternoon in relation to this session. I wanted to ask you about progress, to give you an opportunity to share with us the progress that is being made in relation to the establishment of the anti-corruption unit. And we've read reports in the media about suspensions, and I know that it's difficult for you to say anything much about those, but if you can say whatever you can say, that would be very helpful. But in relation to the resources and the time scale for the establishment of the unit, the capacity, the vetting, and so on, can you provide us with an update on where we are with that? Thank you.
Before I pass over to Pat, just very regrettably, and it is a decision which is not taken lightly. Like the decision to suspend any member of Garda Síochána or any staff within Garda Síochána is one that we take very seriously. It's subject to close scrutiny, and it has to go through then a number of checks and balances to make sure that a suspension is appropriate and it's the proportionate response to a scenario. And regrettably then, over the last number of weeks, we've been in the news for a series of suspensions that have happened. And I think it's very difficult for me in a public forum to address each of those circumstances individually, and it wouldn't be fair actually on the individuals engaged. But at any stage in a private setting, we're able to open these matters up a little further. But I have to say that in each of those, I believe it was the appropriate course of action to take, and that was just in terms of the circumstances we find ourselves in, but also importantly around public confidence in Garda Síochána but also then as the appropriate step to take in terms of the investigations that we are also engaged upon as well. And these are investigations which ultimately will be reporting to the Director of Public Prosecutions. For some of these investigations, they have been long running. We've had engagement with the DPP. They've involved detective resources, and I know personally that they're being conducted to a very high standard in terms of the quality of the work that's been done and the very extensive investigations that have to be undertaken. And the wheels of justice will roll on. We investigate, we report to the DPP. The DPP then will determine on what happens next in terms of charges, etc. And then these matters then will either be determined through the courts or not. So it's always some melancholy that one reports on these matters or talks about these matters. We'd far rather that we were never in this position, but regrettably these things do happen. But when they do happen, they must be dealt with in an expeditious manner, and they must be dealt with in a thorough manner, and a manner which obviously satisfies our legislative requirement to investigate wrongdoing, but also the need that we have to make sure that confidence in the organisation is maintained. And really, in that light, it's also appropriate that we've established a Garda anti-corruption unit. And that's not to say that Garda Síochána is rife with corruption. It's not. But the actual risk of corruption and the risk that it brings in terms of reputational damage is such that it is only prudent for ourselves, for me, and for the senior team to make sure that we're watching for this at all times, that are in effect, that our guard is up, that we're making it clear what the standards are within the organisation, that this acts as a deterrent, but also acts as a point of reference for individuals, so that if they are getting into a difficult scenario, be it in terms of dependency on substance or into debt, that they know they can put their hand up and seek assistance as well. So part of it is also, well, a large part of it is actually about the deterrence and prevention in the first place. And also then, when we have such extraordinary powers, when we've the access to huge amounts of personal detail around individuals, and also when with such wide discretion in the office of Garda Síochána that we all enjoy, then it's only prudent that we would form this unit, and it's made clear then to the organisation what exactly are the behaviours we expect, and those behaviours are in line then with the Code of Ethics. So if I pass over to Pat, Pat can give a very positive update on the progress that has been made and where we're going next with this. Pat, please.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Deborah. Thanks, Commissioner. I'll give you a very brief update. In order to accelerate the establishment of the anti-corruption unit, I established and chaired a steering group of internal stakeholders, which has been meeting weekly to drive it on. This group includes HR, accommodation, ICT, finance, procurement, transport, the Garda College, legal affairs, our own internal data protection office, and internal affairs. And I'm pleased to report good progress. So if we take personnel, the competition for Garda personnel is complete. And from the 30th of November, that's next Monday, on a phase basis, the 9th of December, personnel are being allocated to the unit, and they will be inducted into their new positions. Candidates were, as you would expect, subject to a very robust clearance process, which will inform future competitions for sensitive roles. Expressions of interest for Garda staff has also been completed, and a similar clearance process will be conducted in respect of Garda staff. In terms of accommodation, suitable accommodation that's secure has been identified at Garda headquarters, and refurbishment work is due to be carried out there. Pending the completion of the works, interim accommodation has been sourced not too far from Garda headquarters. It's public office space. An integrity reporting line will provide a confidential reporting platform run by a third-party service provider where Garda personnel can report matters of ethical concern. A number of policies have been drafted following an analysis by the implementation team that has been working for the last more than a year. And a number of items of thematic concern have been identified following research. And this would include a policy on anti-corruption, professional boundaries and abuse of power for sexual gain, business interests and secondary occupations, notifiable associations, conflict of interest policy, and substance misuse policy that we're developing in conjunction with our colleagues in human resources. These policies and associated procedure documents are being finalised, with the priority publication being the anti-corruption policy, professional boundaries and abuse of power for sexual gain, and the substance misuse policy. The Anti-Corruption Unit is working on a procurement process for drug testing and preparing a related procedure document. The unit will also focus on the protection of sensitive information and data systems through monitoring the ICT policy. In terms of ICT requirements, ICT requirements to support the effective operation of the unit include the procurement of new hardware and software and the integration of those systems into the existing ICT infrastructure. In terms of training, a blended training approach has been developed with the Garda College, and a bespoke programme will be delivered on the learning management system for senior Garda management. Engagement then with associations and unions. The team has briefed the associations and the unions on the Anti-Corruption Unit. Arrangements are being made for further engagement with those associations and unions regarding the policies and procedures prior to them being implemented. In engagement with external agencies, I have met with the PSNI Anti-Corruption Unit with a view to ascertaining the processes involved in actually establishing their unit and getting going. And the implementation team engaged with a number of other police services who have been very helpful. I briefed the chair of GSOC on the development of the unit, and I've had ongoing engagement with the Department of Justice about the Anti-Corruption Unit and the expected publication of the inspectorate report. Of course, I have briefed the authority and I briefed the inspectors, and I'm in regular contact with both bodies. Then, in terms of the inspectorate report, I have no doubt that the anticipated inspectorate report, Countering the Threat of Internal Corruption, will provide a strong roadmap supported by recommendations to strengthen counter-corruption structures, strategies and processes in An Garda Síochána. I understand that this report has been forwarded to the Department of Justice for consideration and ultimate publication. The Anti-Corruption implementation team continue to engage with the Garda inspectors as appropriate, and I must say I compliment the inspectorate under collegiate work. So I'm to report progress.
Thank you very much indeed. That was very, very comprehensive indeed. I suppose I'm interested in a couple of aspects, and I know our time is against us, really. One is in relation to the IT systems, ICT systems, and the assurance about the confidentiality and security of those systems. And even, can you maybe just mention some of the work to secure those systems in terms of their confidentiality?
Yeah, I suppose what wouldn't surprise you is that our colleagues in England and Wales, and indeed in the PSNI, have identified the exact same issues that the Commissioner alluded to. And, you know, saying that in certain instances, regrettably, information has been passed out of various police organisations is something that has happened, you know, sometimes through innocence, but sometimes through something that's a little bit more sinister. So work will be conducted to check the robustness of the systems and to check on activities of people. And this work has previously been done by, for example, the Garda Professional Standards Unit in terms of monitoring activity, but it's certainly going to be a major focus because we're entrusted with valuable personal data about our citizens, and indeed about our suspects. So it's an area of deep concern for ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Val. The second issue is around the communication to Gardaí and Garda staff.
Yes.
And you've engaged with the associations, which is excellent. What are your plans for that engagement and communication on the remit of the unit and how it operates to the rest of the workforce?
So we will engage in a number of different ways. But part of it will be training, part of it will be communication, and we'll be using, for example, the LMS in relation to training. We'll be using the portal with messaging. We'll be using Andrew McLinden is with us. We've been engaged with him and his people in terms of both internal communication and indeed external communication as appropriate.
Yeah, and that will include the thematic approach that you're taking?
Yes.
Okay. Can you, my last point is, can you tell us how many personnel will be allocated on next Monday?
We're putting it in phase, but it will be initially in of the order of less than 30 people. So, late 20s, 28 to 30 people, that okay. Type of number. Okay.
Okay, Pat, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you to Commissioner and Acting AC Clavin. It was clear from the outset when you took the initiative to establish an anti-corruption unit that this was going to be a permanent feature of the organisation, but also a significant step in a cultural change within the organisation. It will never be undone. None of your successors will ever disestablish this unit. And it was an important statement in the authority's view, and the work that's being undertaken by the people who will be part of this unit will be permanently important work as a reassurance to the public, as a reassurance to the organisation itself, and as a source of continuing confidence internally and externally in ensuring the integrity, which is the hallmark of the great majority of people who are members of the Gardaí or members of the Garda staff. And we will be maintaining a continuing interest in and engagement with the work that you have done. That brings us to the end, or almost to the end, of this public meeting. I just want to say one thing before we draw it formally to a conclusion. This, I think, is the 26th public meeting that the authority has had. And the work of those meetings, as indeed the work of the authority over the last 5 years, has been significantly aided, contributed to, and advanced by the contributions of 3 people for whom this is their last meeting of the authority in public, their second last meeting of the authority, unless we spring a couple of extras in December, which is not beyond the bounds of possibility, building on our practice this year. But in alphabetical order, Vicky Conway, Pat Costello and Judith Gillespie will be leaving the authority at the end of the year. And I did not want to let this opportunity pass to pay tribute to the extent to which their work was foundational in the development of the authority and in the development of the oversight work that we do, and was a remarkable gift to the rest of us who were on the authority. And they now join the other 3 founding members of Josephine Feely and Noel Brett, and our absent friend Maureen Lynott, for the contributions that they have all made to the work which we will be carrying on. And the contribution that they have made to these engagements at the public meeting with you, Commissioner, with your 2 predecessors, and with all of the colleagues, has been an important part of the work that we do. So thank you to them, and thank you to you for your engagement with them, and thank you to you today for a very open and frank engagement at this meeting and at our meeting earlier.
Chair, may I ask a question under any other business?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had raised this earlier. Just in relation to last week, the news story relating to intimate images that were being hosted on other sites. I was wondering, Commissioner, could you provide victims and those who may be concerned with an update on those investigations of image-based sexual abuse, and maybe some reassurance in relation to that? Sorry.
Okay, well, I think this is well covered in the media. The report of in effect, it was called a dump of explicit images onto the internet. We have examined those, and first of all, there are no images of child abuse within them. The images run to over 10,000. And all of them have been examined, and as yet we've had no actual complaints of image-based sexual abuse. So also then the website which is hosting them isn't based in Ireland. We have been in touch with the law enforcement agency where it is based, and they have assisted us in terms of our inquiries. Plus then we've also reached out to other law enforcement who have specialism in terms of identification of child abuse images, and again, no child abuse images have been located. So we're aware of the circumstances. As yet, we've had no actual complaints of image-based sexual abuse or coercion or harassment, such like. So there's actually no crimes under investigation in this jurisdiction at this moment in time as I speak. But at the same time, as an organisation, we're very aware of coercive control, the harassment of individuals, the problem of images being used to intimidate people, blackmail people as a form of as it's known, image-based sexual abuse. And we would encourage individuals who are suffering from this to come forward and please make a report to Garda Síochána, because we do have specialist teams to investigate this, and we can draw on our own investigative expertise, but also the investigative expertise of other law enforcement agencies, and we'd be anxious to receive any complaints that people might have. I know it is reported as being prevalent. We would want to see reports as well then, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. And with that, this meeting is now over.